The courthouse was unusually crowded that morning. The wide marble steps outside were filled with reporters balancing microphones, photographers adjusting their lenses, and curious citizens drawn by rumors of a trial unlike any other. Inside, the air buzzed with nervous anticipation, the kind that settles before something significant happens. In courtroom 3B, every seat was taken. Lawyers shuffled papers, jurors whispered quietly among themselves, and even the usually stoic bailiffs seemed restless. At the front, the judge reviewed her notes with deliberate precision, adjusting her glasses now and then, her gavel resting lightly in her hand. She was known for her calm authority, yet even she sensed this day would be different. At the far corner of the courtroom sat a German Shepherd police dog. His coat gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his eyes scanned the room with a steady, intelligent focus. He wasn't there to track down suspects or search for evidence, at least not officially. The K9's presence was supposed to be symbolic, a comforting anchor for witnesses, especially children who had been through trauma. To most observers, he was simply a well-trained animal, a loyal servant of the police force. Yet to those who had worked with him before, he was far more than that. A dog with instincts sharper than most humans, and an uncanny ability to sense truth where words often failed. As the attorneys prepared their notes, several jurors sneaked glances at the animal, whispering softly to one another. It was unusual to have a police dog inside a courtroom, and their curiosity was evident. The defendant, seated stiffly beside his attorney, avoided looking at the dog altogether, his jaw tight, his knuckles white against the wooden table. Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the room creaked open. The sound was subtle, yet it rippled through the courtroom like a wave. Heads turned. The murmurs quieted. Into the room stepped a small figure barely 3 feet tall, clutching a threadbare teddy bear with one arm. It was the little girl. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old, her tiny frame almost swallowed by the oversized dress her hair was tied up clumsily, strands escaping and falling into her wide, uncertain eyes. She moved slowly, guided by her guardian, each step echoing against the polished floor. The sight of her, so innocent and fragile in such a solemn place, drew a collective breath from those present. Few believed she would play any meaningful role in the proceedings. Children that young were rarely allowed into court, let alone asked to be near the witness stand. Judges and lawyers knew the limitations. A child so young couldn't provide reliable testimony, couldn't grasp the complexities of truth versus falsehood. But this was no ordinary case, and circumstances had left the court with few options. The girl had been present during the incident in question. She was the only living person who had been inside that house, apart from the accused. Even then, expectations were low. Some assumed she would remain silent, clinging to her teddy bear, unable to say anything coherent. Others thought she might cry or simply stare blankly, too young to comprehend the gravity of the moment. No one, absolutely no one, believed her presence would matter. Yet, from the moment she stepped inside, something shifted in the room. The judge looked up, softening slightly at the sight of the child. The jurors straightened, their earlier fatigue fading. Even the seasoned lawyers, who had seen countless witnesses take the stand, paused in their preparations. There was something about the girl, her innocence, her vulnerability, that pierced through the hardened atmosphere of the trial. She walked forward hesitantly, her small shoes tapping against the floor. The guardian bent low, whispering reassurances, but the girl didn't seem to hear. Her wide eyes scanned the room, darting from the judge to the jurors, then briefly to the defendant. Her tiny hand tightened around her teddy bear. For a second, she looked ready to retreat, to turn and flee back through those doors. Then her gaze found the dog. The German Shepherd had been sitting quietly, his handler standing patiently beside him. The moment the girl's eyes met his, the dog's posture changed. His ears perked, his body leaned forward ever so slightly, and his tail gave a small, almost imperceptible wag. It was as if he recognized her, or perhaps sensed the unspoken connection between them. The little girl froze, staring at the animal. Slowly, her lips curved into the faintest smile, the first sign of ease she had shown since entering the room. She loosened her grip on the teddy, her shoulders relaxing, as though the sight of the dog reminded her of something familiar and safe. A murmur spread through the gallery. It wasn't dramatic, but it was unmistakable. The dog and the child had locked onto each other in a way that no one could ignore. The guardian led her toward the witness stand, but it was clear her attention remained fixed on the German shepherd. She seemed less afraid now, her steps a little steadier, her small chin lifted with new courage. By the time she climbed onto the seat, still hugging her teddy, the atmosphere in the room had shifted entirely. The defense attorney smirked faintly, whispering something into his client's ear. He didn't believe the girl could contribute anything meaningful, and the dog's presence didn't concern him. To him, it was theatrics, nothing more. But the prosecutor, watching carefully, sensed the importance of what had just unfolded. He had seen this dog in action before, seen how the animal could draw out truths buried beneath fear. The judge tapped her gavel lightly, restoring order. "Proceed," she said, her voice calm but expectant. All eyes were on the little girl. She hugged her teddy tighter, her small chest rising and falling rapidly. Her lips parted as though to speak, but no sound came. For a long moment, the courtroom waited in breathless silence. Then, almost instinctively, she glanced back at the dog. His calm, steady gaze never wavered. Something passed between them, something no one else could fully understand. The little girl's lips trembled. A whisper escaped, too soft for anyone to catch. But the German shepherd's ears twitched, his body responding as though he had heard every word. It was the beginning of a moment that would soon unravel everything the defense thought they had secured. And in that instant, though no one realized it yet, the fate of the trial had shifted, triggered not by lawyers, evidence, or legal arguments, but by the silent trust between a child and a dog. The little girl's presence in the courtroom was not only unusual, it was almost unthinkable. Judges rarely allowed children under the age of 10 to appear, let alone a toddler barely past her 3rd birthday. But in this case, circumstances left no other choice. She had been there. On the night of the incident, she had been the only living soul inside the house, apart from the accused. She had seen things no child should ever see, heard sounds that could never be erased from memory, and carried those experiences silently in her tiny heart. Though she was too young to provide testimony in the legal sense, her very presence was considered vital. She was, whether anyone liked it or not, the only innocent witness to what had happened, still bringing her into the intimidating environment of a courtroom felt wrong to many. The prosecutor himself had struggled with the decision. What could a 3-year-old really offer? Words muddled with confusion, fearful silences? Or worse, trauma that left her unable to say anything at all. Her guardian, a weary aunt who had taken her in after the incident, was reluctant, too. She knew the child was fragile. Nightmares often shook her awake, and loud noises sent her into trembling fits. She clung to her teddy bear like a lifeline, refusing to go anywhere without it. What if this experience shattered her further? What if it scarred her permanently? But the judge had ruled. The girl would not be forced to testify in the traditional way. She would simply be present, given the chance to speak if she wished. No questions, no cross-examinations, just a chance. The prosecutor had argued that even her reactions might tell more than any prepared statement. And so, reluctantly, her guardian had agreed. The defense, on the other hand, found the arrangement laughable. A toddler? As a witness? The defense attorney, sharp and smug, whispered to colleagues that it was desperation, nothing more. Children that age don't understand truth from fantasy, he scoffed. She might as well talk about fairy tales. He was confident that her presence would amount to nothing but wasted time, perhaps even sympathy that could be dismissed as irrelevant. But as the girl was led to the witness stand, clutching her teddy bear with both arms, something began to change in the room. The jurors leaned forward. Some were parents themselves, and the sight of her innocence stirred emotions they couldn't easily push aside. The prosecutor studied her carefully, wondering if she might surprise them all. The judge softened visibly, though she maintained her stern composure. And the German shepherd, the police dog stationed in the corner, shifted. Again, his head tilted, ears forward, eyes locked on the child, as though he understood exactly who she was. The guardian helped her climb into the large wooden chair, the seat so oversized she looked like a doll set in a throne. She swung her little legs nervously, pressing the teddy's matted fur against her cheek for comfort. For a moment she looked on the verge of tears. Her big eyes darted around, wide with fear. The defendant smirked faintly at the sight. He whispered something to his attorney, who chuckled under his breath. To them, this was theater. What could a frightened toddler possibly do? The prosecutor began gently, careful not to overwhelm her. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said softly. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to. We just want you to feel safe." But the girl didn't answer. She only hugged her teddy tighter, lowering her gaze as if trying to disappear. Her guardian rubbed her back, whispering encouragement. Still, the silence dragged on. The defense's smirk widened, confident this was exactly what he'd predicted. Nothing. And then her eyes found the dog. It was as if the entire world shifted in that instant. The German shepherd had been sitting calmly at his handler's side, but now his posture changed. His ears perked higher, and his body leaned forward ever so slightly. The child froze, staring at him. Something in her demeanor shifted. Her shoulders loosened, her lips parted, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, she looked calm. The handler noticed immediately. This wasn't the first time he'd seen it happen. The K9 was trained to comfort, to reassure, but sometimes his presence seemed to spark something deeper, a sense of safety, trust, even courage. It wasn't part of his official duties, but it had happened before, in smaller, quieter moments. During investigations, the little girl tilted her head, almost mirroring the dog's curious expression. Slowly, her tiny hand loosened its death grip on the teddy bear. Her breathing steadied. The jurors noticed. Murmurs rippled quietly through the gallery. The prosecutor's heart skipped. The judge leaned forward slightly, her gavel resting forgotten in her hand. Something real was happening here, something no one had anticipated. The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably, no longer smirking. The girl's lips trembled as if she wanted to say something, but still no sound came. She looked from the dog to the people around her, then back again, as though unsure whether it was safe. The German shepherd didn't move, but his steady eyes never left hers. It was a silent exchange, invisible to most, but powerful to anyone paying attention. In that moment, the girl didn't seem like a frightened child, trapped in a world too big for her. She seemed like someone who recognized a friend, someone who finally wasn't alone. The guardian's hand gently stroked her back. "You're okay," she whispered. "He's here. You're safe." And somehow, the girl believed it. The defendant noticed the shift, too. His smirk was gone now. He tapped his attorney's arm, muttering nervously. He didn't like this. Didn't like the way the jury leaned closer, didn't like the change in atmosphere. It was subtle, but undeniable. The little girl was no longer just a child in the courtroom. She was becoming something else. A voice. A symbol. The judge cleared her throat gently. "Take your time, dear," she said softly, her sternness replaced with warmth. "There's no rush." The girl blinked, her tiny fingers tracing the ear of her teddy bear. She opened her mouth, but instead of words, a whisper slipped out too faint for anyone to catch. The German Shepherd, however, reacted instantly. His ears twitched, and he straightened, his body taut with attention. Gasps whispered through the courtroom. The prosecutor's eyes widened. The handler's grip on the leash tightened. Even the judge froze. Something had just happened, though. No one was entirely sure what. The girl's gaze never left the dog. She looked calmer now, as though she had passed a secret only he could understand. For the first time since the trial began, it felt like the walls of silence were beginning to crack. And though no one could have predicted it, her presence had already begun to unravel the carefully constructed defense. The reluctant witness, the child everyone had doubted, was about to speak in a way no one had imagined. The courtroom was utterly silent. Everyone leaned forward in their seats, straining to hear the child's faint whisper. Though the words were lost to human ears, the German Shepherd had heard them. His ears perked, his head tilted slightly, and his powerful body tensed as if her voice carried more weight than any command spoken by his handler. The little girl's gaze remained fixed on him. It wasn't the watchful stare of fear, but the tentative curiosity of recognition. Her tiny lips parted again, though no sound came this time. She shifted in her chair, clutching her teddy bear close, but her eyes never left the dog. It was as though the rest of the courtroom had disappeared. The judge, the jury, the stern lawyers all faded into the background. For a few fragile moments, it was only a child and a dog, their unspoken connection growing stronger by the second. The handler tightened his grip on the leash, sensing the shift. He had worked with this canine for years and knew his every twitch and gesture. This wasn't just alertness. This was something deeper: recognition, even empathy. The dog's steady gaze was locked on the child, as if assuring her that whatever truth she carried, she wasn't alone in it. The prosecutor's breath caught in his throat. He could feel it too, though he couldn't explain why. A dog had gone through countless hours of training obedience, scent detection, protection, but no training could account for this. What was happening now was instinct. Pure, unshakable instinct. The defense attorney shifted in his seat, unease creeping into his features. He didn't like this. He didn't like how the jury seemed captivated, how their eyes bounced between the little girl and the canine, as though watching something significant unfold. This wasn't part of the script he had prepared for. He whispered to his client, but the defendant ignored him, staring at the child with an expression caught between irritation and fear. The judge leaned forward slightly, her glasses sliding down her nose. She didn't interrupt, didn't press the child to speak. Something told her not to. For years, she had prided herself on reading people, sensing when to push and when to let silence speak for itself. Right now, silence was louder than words. The little girl shifted again, her legs swinging nervously. She hugged the teddy tighter and then slowly let one tiny hand drop to her lap. Her fingers trembled as they played with the edge of her dress. She swallowed, glanced once at the jurors, then quickly back at the dog. Her lips moved. This time, the whisper carried just enough for the handler to hear. He leaned down instinctively, though his eyes stayed fixed on his partner. The German Shepherd responded with the slightest whine in his throat, almost inaudible, but enough to send a ripple of shock through the handler's chest. The girl had spoken to him. Not to the judge, not to the lawyers, not even to her guardian, but to the dog. The handler's mind raced. He wanted to tell the judge, to announce what he believed had just happened, but he stopped himself. He couldn't interpret a child's words or risk influencing the case prematurely. Yet he knew with absolute certainty that something critical was unfolding. The jurors, though they hadn't heard the words, felt the weight of the moment. Their eyes softened, their skepticism thinning. This wasn't a rehearsed act. This was raw, unscripted truth pouring out of a child too young to understand strategy. The prosecutor cleared his throat carefully. "Sweetheart," he said gently, keeping his tone soft, "you don't have to be scared. You're safe here." He gestured lightly toward the dog. "Do you know him?" The girl didn't answer directly. She blinked, then gave the faintest nod, her gaze still locked on the animal. A low murmur spread through the gallery. The prosecutor smiled faintly, not pushing further. He had learned enough in that nod. She recognized the canine, and more importantly, she trusted him. The defense attorney was on his feet instantly. "Objection," he snapped, his voice sharp. Leading the witness. "This is absurd. She's a child. She can't possibly be expected to give accurate testimony." The judge raised a hand, silencing him with a firm glare. "Sit down, counselor." The defense attorney hesitated but obeyed, his lips pressed into a thin line. The judge then turned her attention back to the child, her voice gentle. "Little one, you don't have to say anything you don't want to. But if you'd like to talk to your friend over there," she gestured toward the German Shepherd, "you can." The little girl's eyes widened slightly, as if she couldn't believe she had permission. She blinked, hugged her teddy closer, and whispered again. This time, a few words carried just enough for those sitting closest to hear. The dog reacted immediately. He shifted, leaning forward, tail twitching once before going still. His handler's pulse spiked. He knew that reaction. It was the same response his partner gave when he detected a familiar scent, when his instincts screamed that he was on the trail of truth. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The defendant's face drained of color. He leaned back in his chair, muttering something harshly under his breath. The defense attorney shot him a sharp look, urging him to remain calm, but it was too late. The jury had noticed. They always noticed. The little girl smiled faintly for the first time. It wasn't wide or playful, just the quiet, relieved smile of someone who had finally found courage. She lifted her teddy bear high, as if showing it to the dog, and whispered once more. The German Shepherd whined again, louder this time, his body trembling with anticipation. The handler tugged gently at the leash, whispering reassurance, but the dog's eyes never left the child. The judge's gavel tapped softly against the wood. "Order," she said, though her voice betrayed her own astonishment. No one knew what the child had just communicated. No one except the dog. But everyone in that courtroom, jurors, lawyers, even the hardened officers lining the walls felt it. Something real had passed between them. Something powerful. The reluctant witness, whom everyone had doubted, had just broken her silence, not through formal testimony or carefully structured answers, but through the bond with a loyal police dog. And though the words weren't yet clear, their meaning was undeniable. For the first time since the trial began, the truth had begun to stir. The courtroom was tense, like a coiled spring ready to snap. The judge leaned forward, pen tapping lightly on the wooden bench. Jurors exchanged uneasy glances, and even the lawyers seemed frozen in their seats. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the muffled shuffle of the child's shoes against the floor. She had been nervous for so long, clinging to her teddy bear, eyes darting from the crowd to the dog. But now, her gaze locked firmly on the German Shepherd sitting near the witness stand. The dog's handler had noticed it first, the way the animal's ears pricked, his head tilting ever so slightly toward the girl, as though he understood something the rest of the room did not. The girl's lips trembled, Her hands gripped her teddy tighter, and then, with a voice so small yet so commanding in its innocence, she spoke. "Good boy." 2 words. Just that. The impact was immediate. The German shepherd jerked forward, his muscles stiffening, eyes sharp and alert. A low rumble vibrated in his throat. Not aggressive, but purposeful. Gasps echoed across the courtroom. For a second, everyone thought the child had simply praised the dog, something children often did when they saw a friendly animal. But this wasn't ordinary. Not here. Not now. The handler reacted instantly, tightening his grip on the leash. He knew what those words meant. In training, "good boy" wasn't just praise, it was the signal given when the dog had correctly detected something. It was the confirmation phrase, the one-worded reward the dog always associated with uncovering a hidden scent or completing a critical task. And somehow, the child had given it at the exact right moment. The dog lunged slightly toward the defense table, nose twitching, body straining. His tail, stiff and high, wagged with focused intensity. He wasn't distracted, he was locked in, alert, and insistent. The handler's knuckles whitened as he held him back. The defense attorney shot to his feet, voice sharp and angry. "Your Honor, this is absurd. She's a child, she doesn't know what she's saying." But the courtroom wasn't listening to him. All eyes were glued to the scene unfolding, the child's innocent declaration and the police dog's startling reaction. The little girl smiled faintly, almost relieved, as if she had passed a secret message no one else could fully understand. She hugged her teddy closer, her small body swaying slightly in her seat, unbothered by the chaos she had unleashed. To her, she had simply spoken to the dog the way she always did, offering him trust, kindness, and praise. To everyone else, those words carried the weight of something far greater. The judge slammed the gavel once, her voice firm. Order. In the court. But even she could not hide the flicker of astonishment in her eyes. The prosecution leaned forward eagerly, sensing a shift in momentum. The jurors whispered among themselves, visibly rattled. The defense team fumbled with papers, scrambling to regain control of a narrative that was slipping away. The handler cleared his throat, speaking with measured calm. "Your Honor, the K9 unit responds to that phrase as a signal during detection work. It's not something most people would know unless they'd worked closely with him." The judge's brow furrowed. "Are you suggesting the child's statement triggered a trained response?" "Yes, Your Honor," the handler replied. "That phrase indicates to him that he's found something, that his instincts are correct. The fact that she used it here, in this moment, is significant." The jurors sat straighter now, some leaning forward with renewed attention. The defendant, who had been lounging with quiet arrogance, suddenly shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His jaw tightened, his eyes darting to the dog and then to the little girl, who remained completely calm, rocking gently with her teddy bear. The tension in the room was electric. One juror whispered to another, "She's just a kid. How could she know?" Another muttered, "Maybe she saw something. Maybe the dog did too." The defense attorney, red-faced and agitated, tried to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is nothing but a child's imagination paired with a dog's natural excitement. You cannot possibly treat this as evidence. Dogs react to all sorts of things. Children say random words. This is coincidence, nothing more." But no one seemed convinced. Coincidence didn't look this precise. Coincidence didn't make a highly trained K9 unit suddenly lock on with such urgency. Coincidence didn't make a toddler beam with confidence. As though she had just solved a puzzle adults couldn't. The prosecutor rose slowly, her tone calm but deliberate. "With all due respect, counsel, sometimes the purest truth comes from the mouths of those we least expect. This child did not prepare a testimony, nor could she have rehearsed commands known only to a trained police dog. Yet here we are, with her words unlocking a reaction that demands to be taken seriously. The judge studied the girl for a long moment. The child looked back, unafraid, still stroking her teddy's worn ear. Then the judge turned her eyes toward the dog, who was still focused on the defense table, his body stiff with purpose. The silence stretched, broken only when the handler whispered urgently, "He won't let it go. He's found something." A ripple of unease swept the courtroom. The jurors leaned closer. The prosecution's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. The defense attorney shook his head furiously, but even his own client looked rattled, sweat beading on his forehead. The judge exhaled slowly. "We will recess briefly to determine what exactly this animal has detected." Her gavel struck the bench again. Bang, bang, bang. The room erupted into chaos. Reporters in the gallery scribbled furiously, exchanging wide-eyed looks. Spectators whispered excitedly, knowing they had just witnessed a pivotal moment. Jurors sat in hushed shock, their opinions shifting before anyone had even left the room. And in the middle of it all sat the little girl, calm, small, innocent, her two words echoing in everyone's mind. Good boy. She had no idea. Those words had changed everything. For her, it was simple. She saw a dog. She remembered what he had done for her before, and she praised him the way she always did. She didn't understand the gravity, the ripple effect spreading through every corner of that courtroom. But everyone else did. The judge, the lawyers, the jurors, even the defendant, they all understood that the trial would never be the same after this moment. 2 words from a child had cracked open the facade of certainty, pulling truth out into the open in a way no cross-examination or legal maneuver could. The innocence of a toddler and the loyalty of a police dog had converged, and together they had shaken the very foundation of justice. The session would continue. More evidence would be examined. More arguments would be made. But the story of this day, the day a 3-year-old girl said good boy to a police dog in court, would never be forgotten. It wasn't just testimony anymore. It was revelation. And revelation, once spoken, could not be silenced. The moment the judge's gavel struck, the room was thrown into a storm of whispers, gasps, and hurried movements. Everyone seemed to speak at once, their voices blending into a thick cloud of disbelief. Some leaned over benches to share hurried thoughts. Others clutched their notepads, scribbling furiously. The court clerk tried to calm the room, but the shock of what had just happened lingered like an unshakable echo. At the center of it all sat the 3-year-old girl, swinging her legs gently beneath the chair. She clutched her teddy bear as though nothing unusual had occurred. Her face carried a serene satisfaction, the kind of innocence that only a child could display in such a heavy moment. The German shepherd, however, did not mirror her calm. His handler fought to keep him steady, the leash pulled tight against his powerful frame. His nostrils flared, and his body trembled with restrained urgency. His instincts screamed that something was wrong, and everyone in that room felt it. The defense attorney was the first to explode. He slammed his palm onto the table, his voice sharp, panicked, and much too loud. "This is a circus, Your Honor. We cannot allow the babblings of a toddler and the twitching of a dog to dictate the outcome of this case." His words tumbled out, desperate and unsteady. But the jurors weren't convinced. Their eyes had seen too much. The little girl hadn't spoken nonsense. Her words had aligned perfectly with the K-9's reaction. That wasn't random. It wasn't coincidence. It was something far more dangerous to the man sitting beside his lawyer. The prosecutor rose slowly, calm as a wave at dawn. Her voice carried a deliberate steadiness that contrasted with the defense's frenzy. "Ladies and gentlemen, let us not pretend this moment is meaningless. That child did not know court procedures. She was not prompted, nor did she have an agenda. Yet her words triggered a highly trained canine to react in a way we cannot dismiss. This is not chaos, it is clarity. The judge leaned back, her fingers pressed together thoughtfully beneath her chin. She had presided over countless trials, but few moments had ever shaken the room this profoundly. It was as though truth itself had slipped through the cracks of the legal process and stood undeniable in the open. The jurors whispered again, and their faces told the story the defense feared most. Doubt. Doubt about the defendant's innocence. Doubt about the story they had been fed. And in a courtroom, doubt was everything. The defendant shifted nervously in his chair. His once confident smirk had long since faded, replaced by clenched fists and a sheen of sweat across his brow. His eyes darted nervously toward the dog, then to the girl, then to the jury. He saw what they saw, the unraveling of his carefully crafted defense. The handler spoke up again, his voice low but firm. Your Honor, the dog is trained to detect and indicate when he identifies something connected to an ongoing case. His reaction is not random. He is telling us there is something that requires attention. The defense attorney scoffed. It's a dog. You want us to believe a man's freedom hinges on a leash and a bark? But the jurors were not laughing. They had seen the precision in the animal's behavior. This wasn't a pet wagging its tail. This was a professional, trained to sniff out the truth where human senses failed. The prosecutor pressed forward. This court has heard expert testimonies. We've reviewed evidence. And now, before our very eyes, the canine has responded to the child's statement in a manner consistent with his training. Are we really prepared to call that chance? Or is it time to consider that perhaps, despite all efforts to hide it, the truth has just been revealed? The judge's gavel cracked once more. Enough. Her eyes swept across the room, commanding silence. This court will not descend into chaos. However, her gaze sharpened. This court will not ignore what has unfolded here today. The canine's reaction demands consideration. The courtroom quieted, though tension still swirled like a storm about to break. The little girl, oblivious to the storm of adult emotions swirling around her, leaned toward the dog and whispered something only he could hear. The German shepherd's ears twitched, his eyes never leaving the defense table. His tail wagged. Once, sharp and determined, before he sat straighter, alert and waiting. The jurors noticed. The spectators noticed. Everyone noticed. The defendant tugged at his collar, his face pale now. His lawyer leaned close, whispering frantically, but his eyes betrayed him. He knew the tide had turned. And then came the moment that sealed it further. The prosecutor addressed the jury directly, her voice heavy with meaning. We've all witnessed something no script could write. A 3-year-old child spoke the truth without knowing it, and the dog trained to uncover deception confirmed. This is not coincidence. This is not confusion. This is justice breaking through. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The reporters scribbled furiously, knowing they had front-row seats to history. The defense attorney sputtered, scrambling for ground. We cannot admit the words of a toddler into evidence. This is emotional manipulation. But the judge cut him off sharply. Sit down, counsel. What we admit is not her words, but the chain of events they triggered. That dog's reaction will be investigated further. If it leads to additional evidence, then this trial will proceed accordingly. The defendant buried his face in his hands. The jury stared at him now, no longer with neutrality, but with suspicion that had hardened into something more. They saw the way he crumbled under the weight of 2 words. They saw the way the dog had locked on, unshakable and determined. And they saw the innocence of a child, cutting through lies no adult had been able to pierce. The little girl giggled softly. and hugged her teddy tighter. She had no idea she had just unraveled the walls a grown man had built around his secrets. She only knew the good boy had listened, just as he always did. When court adjourned for the day, the room emptied into the hallways buzzing with chatter. Spectators replayed the moment in hushed excitement. Reporters dialed their editors, their headlines already forming. But inside that courtroom, where silence finally settled again, the truth lingered. 2 words had shifted the course of a trial. 2 words had stripped a man of his mask. 2 words, spoken by a child to a dog, had become louder than any lawyer's argument. And now there was no turning back. The eruption in the courtroom was not just noise. It was justice clawing its way forward. And everyone knew this trial would never be the same again. The courtroom buzzed like a hive, even after the gavel had fallen. People whispered as though they'd just witnessed something out of a storybook. A child had uttered 2 words, and a dog had nearly pulled the trial apart. Now, all eyes shifted to the defense table where the canine continued to strain, his nose pressed toward the leather bag that sat beside the defendant. The handler stood firm, his voice calm but edged with urgency. "Your Honor, I'm requesting permission to allow my canine to inspect that bag." The defense attorney leapt to his feet, sputtering. "Absolutely not. This is an invasion of privacy. That bag contains privileged materials." "You can't," the judge cut him off, her eyes sharp. "Counselor, sit down. We will not allow theatrics to overrule reason." A hush fell over the room. The jurors leaned forward, some gripping the edge of their seats. The spectators froze, sensing something monumental was about to unfold. Even the prosecutor, usually composed, showed the faintest spark of anticipation. The defendant shifted uncomfortably, his hands clenched into fists on the table. Sweat glistened on his forehead, and his jaw tightened. His lawyer whispered frantically to him, but his eyes betrayed a panic that words could not hide. The judge turned to the handler. "Proceed." The leash loosened slightly, and the German shepherd surged forward with controlled determination. His paws tapped across the wooden floor, his nose immediately burying itself against the side of the bag. He circled it once, then again, each pass growing more insistent. The dog's tail stiffened, his body rigid with the focus of an animal. That had found exactly what it was trained to find. Then came the signal. A sharp bark. 1, 2. Then the dog sat firmly, staring at the bag, his gaze unwavering. The handler's voice was steady. "He's indicating. There's something inside that connects directly to the case." The defense attorney erupted again. "This is outrageous. You can't let an animal dictate evidence." His words cracked, his confidence eroding with every syllable. But no one listened. The jurors' eyes were wide, locked on the bag. The prosecution stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "Your Honor, the dog's indication is enough to warrant an immediate search." We all know what this means. The judge hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Open it." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The clerk stepped forward cautiously, the defense attorney practically shaking with fury as he objected. Again and again, his words drowned beneath the tension that now consumed the room. The zipper slowly slid open. The sound seemed deafening in the silence. Inside lay a folded shirt. It looked ordinary at first glance, plain fabric, slightly worn. But the moment it was pulled out, the handler nodded. That's what he was alerting on. The prosecutor's eyes gleamed with recognition. "Your Honor, that shirt matches the description of the one missing from the crime scene." The defense attorney stammered, "Coincidence, just coincidence." But his voice lacked conviction now. The shirt was passed carefully to an AIM, evidence technician, who confirmed faint stains along the cuff. Blood, though faded, though difficult to see, the patterns were there. The jurors leaned in, their expressions shifting from uncertainty to grim understanding. The defendant buried his face in his hands. The judge's voice was heavy, each word falling like a stone. This discovery cannot be ignored. This shirt will be entered into evidence, pending immediate forensic testing. The courtroom erupted once more. Reporters scurried to capture every detail. Spectators exchanged shocked whispers, their eyes wide as though they'd witnessed a ghost appear. But in the middle of the chaos, two figures remained steady, the child and the dog. The little girl, still holding her teddy, clapped her hands softly. She didn't understand the meaning of what had been found, only that the good boy had done his job. Her smile was pure, innocent, and untouched by the gravity surrounding her. The German shepherd sat tall, his tail thumping once against the floor, his eyes fixed on the handler as though awaiting further instruction. He had done what he was trained to do: uncover the hidden, expose the lies. The prosecutor addressed the court again, her tone stronger now. This shirt ties the defendant directly to the crime scene. We had suspicions before, but this is confirmation delivered not by bias, not by conjecture, but by truth itself. The jurors nodded, their faces set. The doubt that once lingered had been stripped away, replaced by clarity. The defense attorney slumped in his chair, his earlier fire extinguished. He knew the tide had turned. Every eye in the courtroom could see it. The judge leaned forward. We will adjourn briefly for the evidence to be logged. Court will reconvene with this new development at the forefront. Until then, the defendant will remain in custody. The gavel struck. Bang, bang. The noise that followed was deafening, reporters flooding the aisles, spectators murmuring excitedly, jurors whispering among themselves. And through it all, the image burned into everyone's memory. A child whispering two small words. A dog responding with unwavering loyalty. And the hidden evidence that surfaced because of them. The defendant was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, his shoulders hunched, his face pale. The little girl watched him go, her brow furrowed in confusion. She didn't understand guilt or innocence, evidence or verdicts. She only knew that her friend the good boy had listened when it mattered most. For her, it was simple. For everyone else, it was extraordinary. What had begun as an ordinary day in court had transformed into something no one could forget. The truth had been hidden, buried in a simple leather bag. And yet, through the innocence of a child and the instincts of a loyal dog, it had been unearthed. The prosecutor gathered her notes, her expression resolute. This trial was no longer about weak testimonies or shaky evidence. It had become about the undeniable bond between innocence and justice. The jurors knew it. The spectators knew it. Even the judge knew it. The little girl skipped out of the courtroom with her guardian, her teddy bear bouncing at her side. She paused only once to turn and wave at the German shepherd. The dog wagged his tail in response, his eyes softening as he watched her go. The handler smiled faintly. "Good boy," he whispered, patting the dog's head. And in that quiet exchange, the truth lingered. The hidden evidence had been found. The lies had been stripped away. And the trial would never, ever be the same again. The courtroom carried an unshakable silence after the recess. The shirt, now logged into evidence, had left its mark on everyone present. The jurors sat straighter, their eyes hard with conviction. The prosecution looked quietly triumphant. The defense looked like a crumbling wall, desperate to patch itself before it collapsed entirely. And at the center of it all was the judge, an experienced woman who had presided over decades of cases. She had seen liars and truth-tellers, manipulators and victims. But she had never seen anything like this. A 3-year-old child and a police dog steering the course of justice with nothing but innocence and instinct. The gavel struck once. The court was called back into order. "Proceed," she said, her voice steady. The prosecutor rose first, papers in hand. "Your Honor, members of the jury, we cannot overlook what has unfolded. The evidence that lay hidden in the defendant's possession has been brought forward, not by legal maneuvering or by sheer chance, but through the purest display of truth this courtroom has ever witnessed." A child spoke, and the K-9 responded. Together, they unearthed what this man sought to bury. She gestured toward the defendant, who sat hunched in his chair, eyes downcast. The defense attorney jumped to his feet, voice rising an octave. "This is an emotional circus. Dogs can be mistaken. Children can be manipulated. This entire trial risks becoming a spectacle rather than a pursuit of justice." But his words rang hollow. Even he seemed to know it. The jurors were no longer with him. Their eyes shifted between the prosecutor, the defendant, and the little girl who sat quietly with her guardian, stroking the ear of her teddy bear. They had seen her honesty. They had seen the dog's unwavering focus. And no matter what words the defense spun, nothing could erase that image. The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Counselor, you may argue for your client, but do not insult this court's intelligence. The evidence is now before us. The shirt has been recovered, and the sequence of events that led to its discovery is undeniable." The defense attorney slumped back into his chair. His client shot him a glare, but the damage had been done. The judge's gaze softened as she looked at the child. "What we have witnessed here today is a reminder. The law is built upon facts and evidence, but truth sometimes arrives in ways we do not expect. Today, it arrived through a child's voice and a dog's loyalty." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The jurors nodded. The spectators leaned forward, sensing the weight of the judge's words. The defendant shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. For the first time, he looked small, not the arrogant figure who had strutted into the trial days earlier, confident he could outmaneuver the law. The mask had slipped. The prosecutor spoke again, her voice deliberate. "This case has never been about theatrics. It has been about finding the truth in the middle of lies. And now, the truth stands in front of us unshakable, undeniable, and pointing directly at the man who sits before you." The jurors watched the defendant with eyes that were no longer impartial. Their minds had shifted. Their verdicts, though not yet spoken, were already forming like storm clouds ready to break. The child, oblivious to the intensity, giggled softly and whispered again to her teddy, as though sharing a secret. She clapped her small hands once, smiling at the German shepherd. The dog's ears perked, his tail tapping against the floor. That moment so innocent, so simple struck harder than any argument could. In a world of adults weaving lies and defenses, the truth had been delivered by the unlikeliest of voices. The judge turned her eyes back to the defendant. For too long, this court has heard words meant to obscure and confuse. But clarity has now arrived, and it cannot be ignored. She leaned back, her gavel resting against the bench. This trial has reached its turning point. The defense attorney scrambled once more, his voice rising in desperation. "You cannot let this child dictate justice. She doesn't understand what she's saying. She doesn't even understand where she is." But the judge silenced him with a single strike of the gavel. "Enough. What matters is not what she understands, but what the court understands. And this court understands that the truth has been revealed." The words rang heavy, echoing through the chamber. The defendant's shoulders sagged. His lips moved as though he wanted to speak, but no sound came. The once proud posture had withered into defeat. His eyes flicked toward the jury and found no sympathy there. The prosecutor's gaze held steady. The jurors' stares were cold. The spectators watched, rapt, as though history was being written before their very eyes. The judge's final words of the day carried the weight of inevitability. This case will not return to how it was. From this moment forward, we proceed with the full understanding that innocence has spoken and loyalty has revealed. The truth stands before us, and it cannot be buried again. Her gavel struck 3 times. Bang, bang, bang. Court adjourned. The room exploded into noise reporters rushing for the exits, jurors whispering among themselves, spectators buzzing with energy. But amidst it all, one image lingered above the chaos. A little girl smiling at a dog wagging his tail in response, and a judge recognizing that, sometimes, the simplest voices carry the loudest truth. The turning point had arrived, and there was no going back. The courtroom was quieter than it had been in days. The echoes of the previous sessions lingered in the air, heavy with tension and anticipation. Every seat was filled, every eye fixed on the little girl and the German shepherd who had, without realizing it, become the most crucial witnesses of the trial. The defendant sat rigid in his chair, a shadow of the confident man who had once swaggered into the room. His lawyer whispered desperately in his ear, but he no longer had the energy or the courage to respond. The tide of truth had turned, and there was no defense strong enough to stop it. The judge cleared her throat. We reconvene for the final portion of this trial. The court has reviewed all evidence, including that recently discovered by the K9 unit. All parties are to remain attentive and respectful. The little girl clutched her teddy bear tighter, her small frame perched on the witness stand. Though she didn't fully understand the gravity of the trial, she sensed the importance of what had happened. Her tiny heart thumped with a mix of curiosity and quiet pride. She had said her words, trusted the dog, and something extraordinary had happened. The German shepherd sat beside his handler, his eyes sharp and alert, yet calm. He had done his part, uncovered what had been hidden, and his instincts had proven irrefutable. In the world of adults, where lies and deceit often masqueraded as truth, his simplicity had cut through the chaos. The jurors leaned forward. Their whispers had subsided, replaced by a focused, determined silence. Even the gallery seemed to hold its collective breath, as if waiting for justice itself to speak. The prosecutor rose. "Your Honor, members of the jury," she began, her voice measured and strong. "We have seen evidence unfold before our eyes that points clearly to the defendant's guilt. The recovery of the shirt, the alignment of the events, and the actions of the K9 unit confirm what was already suspected. Yet what struck this court most was the catalyst of these discoveries, the innocent intervention of a child who spoke the truth without knowing it, and a dog trained to uncover it." She paused, letting her words settle. The jurors nodded subtly, their expressions hardening into recognition. The defense attorney tried once more, his voice shaky. "This is circumstantial. A child spoke 2 words. A dog reacted. You cannot possibly." The judge raised a hand, cutting him off. "Counselor, your objections are noted, but futile. The court recognizes the evidence, the chain of events, and the undeniable influence of the K9 in locating critical proof. Your attempts to discredit the child or the animal are irrelevant. The facts speak for themselves." The defendant's jaw tightened. He shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to the little girl who remained oblivious to the magnitude of her role. The K9's gaze, unwavering and intense, never left him. The bond between the child and the dog had done more than calm nerves. It had exposed truth. The judge's gavel struck lightly. "Members of the jury, you have witnessed the discovery of hidden evidence, the connection between witnesses, and the integrity of the investigation. You are to deliberate and reach a verdict based on the facts, guided by the events that have unfolded in this courtroom." The jury filed out quietly, leaving the defendant sitting tense and pale. The gallery waited, whispers soft but filled with anticipation. Outside, cameras flashed, capturing every moment. Inside, hearts raced, waiting for the moment that would mark the conclusion of a trial no one would ever forget. Hours passed in tense deliberation. Finally, the jury returned. The foreperson, a stern woman with eyes that had followed every detail intently, rose. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, "we have reached a verdict." The defendant's shoulders sagged slightly, though he attempted a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. A defense attorney fidgeted, papers trembling in his hands. The little girl clutched her teddy bear tightly, her gaze flicking to the German shepherd as if seeking reassurance. The dog's ears twitched, and his tail thumped lightly against the floor. The foreperson took a deep breath. "On all counts, we find the defendant guilty." The room erupted. Gasps, cheers, and cries of relief flooded the courtroom. Some jurors hugged each other. Some spectators cried softly. Even the prosecutor allowed herself a small, victorious smile. Justice, at last, had been served. The judge nodded, her gavel striking 3 times with finality. So ordered. "This court is adjourned." The defendant was led away, his face pale and defeated. He had underestimated innocence, misjudged the power of instinct, and had paid the ultimate price. The little girl, oblivious to the weight of her words, clapped her hands softly and whispered again to her teddy, her laughter small but full of triumph. The German shepherd leaned forward, tail wagging once, ears flicking as though understanding the celebration. His handler gave him a gentle pat. "Good boy," he murmured. The dog's eyes softened, content that his role in uncovering the truth had been acknowledged. Outside the courtroom, reporters jostled to capture statements. Cameras clicked, capturing images of the child, the teddy bear, and the heroic dog. Social media buzzed instantly, sharing the story of a toddler whose 2 words had changed the course of a trial, and a dog whose instincts had revealed the hidden truth. The little girl's guardian knelt beside her, hugging her tightly. "You did something amazing today," she whispered. The girl's eyes sparkled, simple pride lighting her face. She didn't fully grasp the depth of what she had done, but she understood enough to know she had helped someone find the truth. The prosecutor walked past, kneeling briefly to speak to the child. "Thank you," she said softly. "You helped a lot of people today." The girl nodded, smiling shyly. The judge lingered for a moment longer, watching the scene unfold. She had presided over many cases, but none had ever been touched so profoundly by the innocence of a child and the loyalty of a dog. Justice had been delivered, not solely by human hands, but by the purest forms of trust and instinct. As the courthouse emptied, the story spread quickly. Headlines shouted, "Toddler and canine reveal hidden evidence in court. Justice served." 2 words change everything. Child's testimony leads to guilty verdict. Police dog and toddler team up to expose the truth in landmark case. The little girl would grow up never fully realizing how powerful her words had been that day. The German shepherd, now considered a hero, would retire after the trial with honors, having fulfilled a duty few could ever imagine. But for everyone? In that courtroom, the memory was indelible. The small voice that spoke 2 words, the loyal dog that responded without hesitation, and the truth that could not be hidden. Justice had prevailed, and it had done so in a way no one could forget. The little girl skipped down the courthouse steps with her guardian, holding her teddy close, sunlight glinting off her hair. The German shepherd followed with his handler, tail high, ears alert, ready for whatever came next. In the world of law, there were rules, procedures, and precedent. But on that day, in that courtroom, justice had been delivered by the simplest, most extraordinary combination: innocence and loyalty. And that truth spoken in 2 words would echo through the halls of the courthouse forever.